Hey, welcome to week three. As you may be able to tell, this one is coming up late again this week, this lecture. And once again, my plans for the lecture this week were slow coming to formation, and then they kind of fell through this week. I was going to ask my wife to, my personal dietitian, to come in and talk to us, to give us a lecture, and then we had a snow day and we had some school stuff happening with our kids, and today's my uh, youngest kid's 13th birthday, so things kind of got chaotic and we weren't able to come through with our an interview or a talk by my wife, a registered dietitian. And what I was hoping that she would be able to do was to take a look at the work we were doing this week in humanities and then give a spin on it from a scientific, from a healthcare perspective. That didn't happen this week. Hopefully, we can have her come in sometime this semester. I I like my wife, and I like her as a dietitian, as a professional. She's also an herbalist. She is somebody who specializes in well-being and personal well-being, as you might have seen from her blog. So I think she's got a lot of interesting perspective on food, and hopefully you get a chance to meet her sometime this week. I wanted to go ahead and get something recorded. I don't, I because I didn't put together a lecture because I was expecting to be able to do it with her, and so I didn't get a full lecture put together. But this week is a little bit abstract, and part of the idea was to take a look at a few different weird texts or a few disparate texts, very different texts, and then think about, okay, how are we looking at these as people who are studying the humanities? How do we look at a children's book? How do we look at a text from classical antiquity that's kind of weird to read, but is like one of the first doctors saying this is what we do to be healthy? How do we look at a text from a Native American tradition? How do we look at advertisements? The point of this week was just to kind of think about all the ways these different texts from these different worlds were telling us to be healthy. And one of the things that we have to confront if we're thinking about food is, how do we talk about food in a way that is prescriptive? It gives us lots of rules. It tells us what healthiness, how to be healthy with food. We need to talk about that if we're going to talk about food. But also from the humanities side, I think it's really interesting to see how our culture trains us to look at food in different ways. So the point of all these texts coming in this week was to get us to think about, how does our culture tell us what to believe about our eating, about our foods, about what is good food and bad food, and doing that from the healthcare perspective is one way to do that. I want to share my screen and go take a look at our course just for a couple minutes. I will say, as we're doing this, my house is chaotic right now. So I've got 4 13-year-olds in the basement goofing around. And I've got my adult daughter is visiting, and I've got my 2 dogs, and it's just a chaotic Saturday. Um, you know, and I'll just say, as a professor, um, I have an understanding, I think, of our students and our students' lives and how chaotic they are, because my life can be chaotic as well. One of the things that we have to keep on doing, whatever, however our lives are going, is to stay up on the work and stay in touch with each other. My 2 lectures have come in a little bit late last week and this week, and I'm sorry about that. I'm going to try to make sure I make some plans for making sure this doesn't happen again. But in the meantime, I hope that you're keeping up on the work. We have texts that you have to read, discussion boards you have to jump on, reading journals that you've got to fulfill. So I want to just take a look at the week this week and scroll down through all the different things we're doing. The Very Hungry Caterpillar, the Hippocrates regimen in health, a discussion board on where you're trying to work through that very weird text, a video on traditional Native American diet, video on diet commercials, and this very smart dietitian's blog on mindful eating practices. What I'm hoping as you go through these things is that, yes, you're thinking about food and you're thinking about diet and you're thinking about all the different pressures we have on those foods, which make it a little bit more next week when we talk about rules in food. But that you're also thinking about the humanities. What does it mean for you as a scholar to read The Very Hungry Caterpillar and then to turn around and read Hippocrates' Regimen and Health? How do those two texts talk to each other across the centuries, across thousands of years? How do they talk to each other as a children's book and a book that was written for the general populace? When you start combining, looking at these different texts, what kind of meaningful experience are you having in the humanities, and how are you making that experience meaningful for you? But not only for you, but how might you make it meaningful when you talk to others? And that's the discussion boards. The discussion boards are asking you to get into conversations. Let's see how this one's going. It looks like we got 10 people that have posted so far, which is good. A couple people, it looks like Ali posted a couple times. 10's not bad at this point. Maybe it might be more helpful if people would post a little bit earlier on discussion boards and get a little bit more going back and forth. There's a couple people that don't have comments here, and it's always good to reply to people that don't have comments, to make this more of a real discussion to help you work through those texts. The more you respond, the more other people will respond, and the more meaningful it will get for all of you. Let's look at the other discussion board. What are the humanities? And that one only has a few posted. It's a harder question, and it's asking you to do a little bit of thinking work, because of course, part of this class is the critical thinking you do in college. So we got those two discussion boards going. Your textual journals is due on Monday. You don't have to do notes on a journal response for this lecture this week, since it's coming up late, and because it's not really a planned out lecture. It's just me coming into a classroom and talking. But the other material, you do need to make sure it's in your journals. You've got your first journal grade back. I'm probably going to grade the second or third one just to give you an update on how those journals are going. But then most of the journals are just going to be graded as you're doing the work. And then I'll check them later to make sure that you actually did the work. That's about all I've got for today, other than to say, think about those pressures that you have on you. And I'll just give you another little personal story here. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Weight Watchers was the dominant voice over healthy eating for many, many people in the culture at that time, most particularly for women. And like those diet commercials that you saw for one of our readings this week, Weight Watchers was kind of this powerful force in the minds of many women on telling them how they should eat, why they should eat, what they should eat, and how little they should eat. The culture of Weight Watchers has changed a little bit, but I know it was a part of my culture, and not just Weight Watchers, but this idea of knowing how you were eating healthy or how you were eating to lose weight was most particularly, maybe because I come from a family of fat folk. So I can remember my grandmother and my mom and my aunt having these competitions over the miles from Alabama to Michigan on who lost the most weight. And it always seemed to be like this fruitless task, because they would have this discussion, this pressure for each other, and then 6 months later they were doing it again. I likely thinking about how these pressures affect us, and then how they affect the idea of food, advertising of food, the idea of healthy consciousness. And I think my wife's blog here really kind of gets to a point that it was necessary for my mother, for my grandmother, for my aunt, that is to be mindful, not stressed, to be thoughtful about what food is as a part of your life, part of your culture, about a part of your well-being, rather than food as this thing to control or to that could be harmful. I hope you're making some connections this week. I hope this is a meaningful week for you. And hopefully we can get Shauna to come in and talk to us sometime later in the semester. Your work will be up again on Tuesday for the next week, and I hope you're having a good weekend. We'll talk to you soon. I always stop talking before I stop recording. Have a good weekend.